This video I'm going to show you how I set up my CoverPro 10x17 portable shed. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do here is kind of go through and lay out the parts so it's easier to put everything together. Almost everything came wrapped in plastic, which I can't say I was a fan of. But maybe they did that so the paint wouldn't chip or to keep everything organized, I'm not sure. The instructions are pretty detailed though, so I won't go over what parts go where, but I did do things a little different because it seemed easier, so I'll show you every step I took. First thing I do here is lay out all the top connectors. Then I go through all the poles to find the top ones so I can insert them into the connectors. I should note here that there are 2 middle connectors and 2 end connectors with 3 poles in between. And now for the top sides. I have 8 poles along with 8 connectors, again with the end connectors being different than the middle for each side. I just go through and insert the side poles to the top connector and then insert the side connectors at the bottom of each pole I just added. Now I have to find the poles that get inserted in between the side connectors. All the poles should be labeled to make that easy though. But first I decided to put all the vertical side poles together. And apparently I decided to put the cover on first before I get the side poles inserted. Not too sure it makes sense to do it that way, but you know what they say about hindsight. While doing this, you'll want to look for the sides with the straps running through them so you know that those go on the front and the back. It took me a little time to get on there, but I eventually get it. Now I'll just lay out all the side poles so I can insert them pretty fast. And here's where I realized that I probably should have inserted the vertical poles in between the connectors first. They end up coming apart pretty easy, so you're going to see me struggle with keeping them all together from here until I'm done. I think if I ever have to build one of these again, I'll try to tie a rope from the front poles to the back and see if that helps keep them together. As you can see, some of the poles start coming apart when I try to raise the other side. I suspect that it wouldn't have been so bad if I just put the vertical poles into the connectors first though. The curved footers made it difficult to get this put together as well. Notice how this one at the bottom right of the screen tilts over and falls out. But I just keep at it and reinsert all the poles that fall out when I'm putting it together. And eventually, I get them all together. Now I'm going to start lining the cover up and adjusting the poles evenly, also making sure that they're inserted all the way. You can see the line at the top of the cover, so you'll know that that's even when it's directly over the top poles. So I just get everything lined up as best I can, and then I'll start attaching the lower side vertical poles. Before I do that, I want to make sure that I have all the parts that I need, so I'll gather up all the hardware and throw it next to the poles they get attached to. Then I make sure I have the right amount of poles by doing the same thing. Now I'm going to grab the nuts, bolts, and ratchet wrench to begin attaching the lower horizontal poles. And the first thing I'll do is slide the poles through the sleeves like so. Then I go through and insert the rest of the poles into the sleeves. I decided to do it this way as opposed to attaching them after I slide them in so I can measure down to even the cover out. Now I'm going to attach the hardware that will connect the horizontal poles to the vertical poles. And I do that by inserting a couple bolts into the first connector, then slide those bolts through the horizontal poles so I can attach the hardware on the front. And after I put the front hardware on, I screw the nuts on the bolts without tightening them up all the way. Now I'm just going to go through and do this for the rest of the middle poles so I can start measuring to even the cover. I'm saving the hardware on the ends for after I get the middle measured up evenly. And you'll see why I'm doing that next. The footer parts on the ends are curved, so I won't be able to measure them the same way I can at the middle, so that's why I haven't done them yet. So I'm just going to pull the side poles with the greater length to the footer down until they're even with the poles across from them. It also helps to try to line the overlap in the middle of the cover over the top poles. And then once I have the same measurement for the middle poles, I can go through and tighten up all the hardware. Now, if I recall correctly, the instructions will suggest that you put the cover on after you have all the poles together, and I chose not to do it that way. I had put together 4 of the 10x10 sheds before building this one, and it was easier to put the cover on those before I inserted the side poles. It may actually be easier to save the cover for after the poles are together on these larger sheds, though. I guess I'll find out how much harder it is to put the cover on with the poles together once I have to replace it. Okay, after the hardware is tightened up, I'm going to bolt the 4 middle footers on, so here is that process. All I do is slide the bolt through, put on the nut, and then tighten it up. It would have been nice to have lock washers for these nuts, but I didn't get any. And now I just go through and put the other 3 footers on the middle poles. While I do that, I want to bring up lifespan on these covers since I mentioned it before. After doing some research, I found comments that suggested that UV damage to these sheds will cause them to only last 3 to 5 years. So you might want to keep that in mind if you buy this from a retailer that offers replacement plans. Now that the middle hardware is attached, I can do the ends, which is pretty much the same process, but the hardware only has one side. So here I'll just put the nut on, measure down from the insert to make sure it's the same distance as the middle poles, and then tighten it up. Then I go through and do the same thing for the other 3 ends. Now going back to the cover lifespan, I'm actually going to be putting another tarp over top of this one, and then wrapping the sides with bamboo reed rolls to make it last longer. This shed is going to attach to the back of my 4 10x10 shed plus canopy cluster that I've already built, which you'll get a peek of at the end of the video. Okay, so now that I have all the poles put together, it's time to space out all the legs and put the front and back on. For me, this won't matter at this point because I'm going to move the shed, but I would suggest that you measure everything up to space the poles out evenly before installing the anchors. And I would install those anchors before putting the front and back on so you have better light to work in, but I'll show how to do that later. But next I'll install the cover on the back of the shed. So after separating the back cover from the front, the first thing I'll do is tie sticks to the straps that go through the cover. What this does is prevent the straps from going up inside the cover when I attach it to the poles. Trust me, you're going to want to do this if you decide to build your shed like I did. I had a strap go up inside the cover on the first shed I built, and it took me a good half an hour to get it out. Alright, so now I just go through and pull the poles out so I can wrap the strap around the connectors, put the pole back in, and then tuck the back cover through so I can tighten everything up. I do the top first and then both the sides. Here's a closer view of that process. I pound the pole out first, and I wrap the strap around the connector, put the pole back in, and then tuck the back cover through so I can tighten it up. Which can be a little tricky as you see here. The side falls right back out when I tuck the top through. But after I get the top in, I just keep going back and forth until it's all tucked in so I can start tightening the strap with the ratchets at the footer. And these are the ratchets. I'm going to throw a couple down in each corner for when I'm ready to use them. First I need to untie the sticks I use to prevent the straps from going up inside the cover. Then I'll feed the strap through the ratchet so I can start cranking to tighten everything up. And same thing for the other side, making sure the straps are somewhat even before I tighten the ratchets all the way. So taking a closer look, I feed the strap through, pull the cover over to tuck it back in while keeping the strap tight, then I start cranking the ratchet to tighten the back cover up. But first a final adjustment. Then I go back and forth until I have the strap tightened all the way. And while I do that, I'd like to bring up another thing to consider about replacement plans. I read a comment from a CoverPro retailer employee, and they mentioned that you can just bring most of your shed in to have it replaced in the event where it gets damaged during a storm. So that's another reason to consider paying for one. Now, I'm not saying that's how it works for every plan, so be sure to ask for details if you consider one. Next, I'll attach the front cover, which is the same process as the back, so I won't spend too much time going over that. So again, first I wrap the top strap over the connector. Then I do the same for the sides, accidentally knocking the pull out on the first one. And here's something I do want you to notice. Watch how I tuck the sides in first, and then both sides come out when I tuck the top in. So if you do decide to build your shed the same way, remember to tuck the top in first, and then the sides in next. Here I'm inserting the strap into the ratchet, but this time I'll start the outside ratchet as well, which I put into the hole in the top of the footer instead of the side. So let's just take a closer look at both ratchets after I untie the sticks from the straps. I insert the ratchet for the front cover strap on the side of the footer. Then I feed the strap through the ratchet, pull the strap tight, and begin cranking on the ratchet to tighten the strap up. And I do the same for the main cover strap, except I insert the ratchet into the hole in the top of the footer. This is probably easier to do from the outside, but I was just trying to get them both done in one shot. And again, make sure you don't tighten them up too much at first. I want to readjust the cover before doing so, which is a lot easier with some slack in the strap. Then after I'm happy with how even I have the cover, I'll go back and forth to tighten all 4 of the ratchets up so I'll be ready to install the anchors. Like I said before though, I'll be moving the shed to another location before I do the anchors, so I'll just show you the anchor install for my 10x10 shed cluster since those sheds use the same hardware. I was a little worried that a colored shed might not let that much light through, but I was actually quite impressed with how bright it was on the inside of the shed. I ended up covering this shed with a thicker mill white tarp, and it was still pretty bright on the inside after that. So I still need to install the anchors, which I will show at the end, but that is how I built my shed. Now here I want to show you how I roll up the front door because I found it a little tricky. I start by rolling up one side, then wrap the Velcro around to keep it in place. Then I roll the other side and do the same. Then I do one final adjustment of the covers and I'm ready to pull a couple vehicles in to see the kind of space I'll have to deal with. So starting with the truck, I back in while trying to get the passenger side as close to the shed as possible so I have room to get in and out. It's not too bad, but the truck won't fit in all the way in between the pulls, so the door will stick out quite a bit when I try to close it, which will prevent me from zipping it all the way down. So I can only zip each side down halfway, which is still work if you don't want to spend the extra money on a larger shed. Now you'll have a lot more room with a smaller car, so this is a really good option if that's the case for you. It'll still be a little cramped if there's two people getting in and out, but you can always just let the passenger out before you pull in. As you can see, the shed closes with no problems though. So here's the anchor installation on the shed cluster, which should be the same process since these 10x10 sheds seem to have the same hardware. Now it looks like I'm installing these on the outside of the sheds, which you will not want to do. I'm only doing that because it's still on the inside with how I built this cluster. It was also easier to shoot video of these since the anchors on the inside of the tents were in a corner. So the first thing I'll do is drill a hole with my auger bit to make it easier. Now these anchors are the hardest part of the shed installation, but there may be an easier way to do it if you can figure out how to attach them to a drill. I really didn't want to spend that much time trying to figure out how to do that though, so I just used this bar. It wasn't easy to do, but it also wasn't really hard to do. But then again, I'm getting to be an old man, so this would probably seem really easy if I was still in my 20s. Anyway, what I'm doing is similar to how it's done from the inside, except you'll only be wrapping the wire around a single footer. Here I'm wrapping around 2 footers since I decided to use one anchor on the corners of the sheds that were side by side. And you can ignore these pins completely since they go into the footer of the canopy. So after I get those in, I can now put the clamp on the wire that will secure the footer to the anchor in the ground. I'm putting both the nuts on the end, then I'm just tightening them up, and then that's it. You want to make sure you pull the wire tight when you get closer to having the clamp tightened all the way. If you try before, it'll most likely just loosen up. And this takes a little bit longer for me since I couldn't get the ratchet side of the wrench on the nuts since it was such a small clamp. But eventually I get there, and I just cut the excess wire off, and that is it. Hopefully this video has helped, and feel free to ask any questions that you still may have in the comments. Thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe for more quick and on-point videos.